It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us is Claire Swinarski with a Catholic Feminist invitation to live boldly, love your faith, and change the world. Thanks for being here, Claire.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So if you were putting together a dictionary definition of feminist, how many entries do you think there'd be, and what definition would you most closely identify with?
I think there'd probably be about 7 pages worth. Right?
7 pages? Okay.
Has their own definition of feminism. There's just so many. It's not like our Catholic faith where there's like a book that we can go to look it up and see if it's really in there or not. So the definition of feminism that we work with is the equality of the dignity of men and women. And I think when you define it like that, every single Catholic should be a feminist.
So how would you, that was very specific, that definition, the equality of dignity, how would you explain that versus the difference between men and women?
I think what's important to remember is that just because men and women aren't the exact same doesn't mean that they can't still have that dignity. So if you look at something like secular feminism, a big issue right now is gender definitions, right? In many ways, they're trying to get rid of any difference between men and women. But in my opinion, if there's no difference between men and women, then why do we need feminism at all? Like, why do we have to fight for equal rights for women if it's just like whatever, we're all the same? You know, if we're not acknowledging the special different things that women bring to the table, then I don't really see a need for feminism. So I think the Catholic Church really beautifully recognizes the totality of the differences between the genders, but then also shows that they're each beloved and needed.
Which is interesting because I think that's kind of the opposite of what a lot of people think about the Catholic Church and their view of women. So can you explain what makes you think that the Catholic Church is actually a feminist organization?
You know, I think within the Catholic Church, there's people who don't value women the same way that within the Catholic Church, there's people who lie and people who steal. But that doesn't mean that that's actually church teaching. So we have to go to what the saints before us have taught us. I always point people to St. John Paul the Great's letter on the dignity of women. It's, to me, the absolute perfect document summarizing why women are so special and beloved by God and needed within the church. And then you look at someone like St. Edith Stein and her writing on the importance of women. You know, throughout church history, the Catholic Church has really loved and cherished and elevated women. It's just people within the church who have sometimes not lived up to that standard. But I think that's the truth with all sin.
Can you share a little bit from St. Pope John Paul II's letter? What are some of the takeaways, maybe some of the key issues that he brings up?
Sure. Something that I really love in that letter is that he talks about the meaning of the word serve. You know, when you're reading Genesis, you know, like Eve was here to serve Adam, it's kind of like, oh, people read that and do not like that because we think about women who are oppressed for so many years, not allowed to have jobs and being forced to be in the kitchen. But St. John Paul II really dives into the meaning of that word serve and how Jesus came to serve, not to be served. And so if we're saying that we're too good to serve other people, we're really saying we're too good to be like Jesus, which we don't want, right? And so it's really broadening the definition of that word serve. You know, can we serve people by being doctors or lawyers or stay-at-home moms or whatever path God is calling you to do? How can you find service within that? That always really sticks out to me. And then, of course, he always highlights Mary and her fiat, and that's another thing that really jumps out at me, the importance of women being brave and bold and standing up for what's right the way Mary had to. You know, she obviously got so much disrespect likely for being pregnant when she was, but she knew the truth, she knew God's love, and she was able to stand in that bravery. And so those are kind of the things that stick out to me the most.
And you talked about the church's teachings being very solid in this area, maybe some of the people that are part of the Catholic Church not doing the best job of putting these teachings into practice. What would you say are some things that we as Catholics, not necessarily the Catholic Church, but we as Catholics can do to improve the respect for women?
You know, it's funny. I was just reading an article this morning. I posted it on our Facebook page about a group of guys at a Catholic high school who started a feminist club. And I thought that was so cool because it's these young boys saying, hey, we've noticed that in our school, we're having some issues with the way that men are treating women. They're not talking about them in the locker room right. They're not treating them right at school dances. We really want to create a culture where men value and respect women. And I thought that was such a unique way to look at it. You know, like, what can Catholic men do to respect women and to uphold them and to serve women? I really, really loved that. I think that's important. And then I'm always also looking at diversity for women's talks. Like, I've been to so many women's talks in my day. I used to be a missionary. And for so long, I felt like all of the women's talks I was going to were about what to wear, or like how to treat boys on Facebook, or just like how to be in marriage. I really wasn't seeing that diversity of topics that I felt like I saw in men's talks. And so that's always an emphasis, a focus for me as well. Like, how can we bring these heavy-hitting, important topics into women's eyes so that they can bring their feminine genius to them and really help to change the world?
Like what? What topics would you like to see in women's talks?
You know, like sex trafficking, I think is a really big issue with a lot of Catholic women right now. Whenever we have that issue on the podcast, people are so interested in it. Or ethical shopping. You know, women make so much of the shopping decisions for the home. A lot of times we're the ones deciding, like, I don't even, like, what dish towels we're buying.
Right.
And the amount of things in America that are made by literal slaves on the other side of the world would blow anyone's mind. And so I think that these topics, to me, are so much more essential to the conversation than like whether or not leggings are pants. Like, there's room to talk about modesty, but that has for so long has dominated so much of the conversation surrounding women in the church. I'd just like to see us dig our hands into some meatier issues.
But the issues that you bring up, sex trafficking, or, you know, where things are made and how they're produced, just because women tend to do more of the shopping, isn't that an issue that would be just as applicable to men or women? Or do you think there's a different takeaway or a way to talk about it that would be specific for women?
I think both. I mean, it's definitely important to both genders, but I think that there's something really special that happens when you get a group of women in a room, right? Like, if we believe that there's a difference between men and women, there's something special that happens when it's a group of men and something special that happens when it's a group of women. And so just as I think that there's things that it would be great for men to talk about, just them, I think it'd be great for women to talk about just them as well, because then we can bring all of the gifts of our gender together and maybe come up with some different ideas on how to solve this issue, right? Like, the world needs men and women. It needs the gifts from both. But sometimes when we're able to talk about these things separately, we're just able to put a different spin on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. We're talking with Claire Swinarski. The book is Girl Arise, a Catholic Feminist Invitation to Live Boldly, Love Your Faith, and Change the World. And why do you think that those three things are important: to live boldly, love your faith, and change the world?
I think that we're all called to change the world in some way. And I think when you hear the phrase change the world, you kind of think of like Mother Teresa or someone who did some huge, big thing. But, you know, I think raising kids really well is changing the world. Or like being a really great dentist in your community for people's teeth, like that can change the world. And so I think that we're all called to be world changers. But in order to do that, we need to both live boldly and love our faith. I think our desire to change the world and help people should come from a love for Jesus. Like, that's what should power us through. And so we need to love our faith and love the sacraments to power us into being those world changers. And then I always think we're required to live boldly. I think that Jesus told us that over and over again in the Gospels, the importance of being brave, of not being afraid, of doing the hard thing. I think that those are just kind of the tenets to live out a truly Catholic life. So
what do you think are some ways that women can more fully live out their role within the church?
I think that for women, it's important to look at your own individual gifts if you think about like what can you bring to even something as small and local as your parish council? Like what gifts do you have that you could bless your local community with? What could your family bring to the table? I think to start locally is really important because you can learn about issues more on the ground, and then having that more global perspective like we were talking about. I think a gift of women is that we tend to sometimes be a bit more relational. We're able to think about how problems affect relationships. And so I think an issue like ethical shopping is a great way that women can impact the world, because when we make purchases, we can think about, who made this? What were the conditions that they were making it under? How can we really do things in a way that impacts the global world through our Catholic faith? But I think starting local can be a really great way to do that. So just looking at your own church and what they need and how your specific skill set can help with that, whether you're really great at finances or you're a logistical person who needs to be planning the volunteer trips, or you're great with childcare, so you're helping out with the nursery during Sunday Mass. Anything that lines up with your skill set can be needed by the church.
And what about parents? I've got a 6-month-old daughter, so hopefully I haven't messed her up too much yet. But what are some suggestions you would have for parents, especially of young girls, of how we can start heading them in the right direction and maybe steer them clear of some of the misconceptions of what it means to be a woman before, kind of negative influences take over?
Totally. I have a young daughter myself, so that question is so near and dear to me. Mine is 10 months, so just a little ahead of yours. But
yeah.
I think very similar to what we were saying earlier, it's about teaching them who they really are. Everything has to have that foundation of our faith, because that's what we can return to again and again. When we build our house on that rock, it won't fall. And so I think teaching girls really who they are and what they were made for, that gives them a foundation to return to, because society does throw so much crap at our girls, whether it's about, what they look like or what they should spend money on or what they should spend their days doing. But if they have that really solid foundation to return to, I think that's just the most helpful thing that we can do. And I think the second most important thing, if not tied, is teaching them how to pray. Because when we're in conversation with God, we'll never go too far away from his will. So I think really setting up that pattern of prayer, and I mean, that's obviously important for all our kids, but girls in particular, I think that foundation will be so important as they go through high school and college and all those tricky times.
Yeah, for sure. So great, and so much more to talk about, but people should check out the book. Where would you like to send people to get a copy of the book?
They can go to most places books are sold. I think right now it's on sale at barnesandnoble.com actually for 10% off, but you can also hit up Amazon, AveMariaPress.com, or your local Catholic bookstore.
All right. Again, it's called Girl Arise, a Catholic Feminist Invitation to Live Boldly, Love Your Faith, and Change the World. And Claire, you also have a podcast that I think a lot of people would like to check out. Can you explain what you talk about in the podcast?
Absolutely. The Catholic Feminist podcast is women who want to be world changers. So we talk about the intersection of women in the church. It is every Wednesday. We've had everyone from Audrey Assad to Abby Johnson to Christopher West on to talk about how gender relates to church issues. And it's a really great time. We've had some amazing guests on, and we have like 7,000 women tune in every week. So we'd love to have any of you be one of them.
Yeah, and you can find more information about that pretty simple, thecatholicfeministpodcast.com, or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Very good. I've been listening to some of them this morning, and they're really great content, and so people should check that out. And then also, again, the book, Girl Arise, a Catholic Feminist Invitation to Live Boldly, Love Your Faith, and Change the World. Thank you so much, Claire Swinarski, for joining us, sharing this with us, and keep up the great work.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.